Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Bradley Wolfe, and I'm here to go over Chapter 15 of the Public Speaking Project textbook on informative speaking. So as we go through this, I'll talk some things about informative speaking, but it's also helpful to read through some of the examples on your own. They have some example outlines in here, which do a very nice job of showing how informative speeches can be laid out. So you may want to go through those on your own because I'm not going to go detailed through the outlines, but I'm just going over the general topics under informative speaking. So first of all, informative speech, very basically, you're trying to give your audience information that they did not already know, to teach them more about a topic they're unfamiliar with. Again, they may have some knowledge on the topic and they may have some information already, but you're going to add to that. You're going to want to analyze your audience to see where their current level of knowledge is, and then where else can you bring them? What else can you add to that knowledge? You don't want to give a speech to an audience about something they already know, right? You want to give them something new, some new information, or to go further with that informative speech. So that's something important to consider when picking a topic and picking how to approach the topic. There's a variety of different functions of informative speeches. So the first one here says providing people with knowledge. You're going to share some facts, some information that's going to give them knowledge, right? Pretty basic for an informative speech. It's also going to help shape our perceptions. All knowledge that you're providing, you're going to provide it in a specific way, right? We look at the news, all news media has some sort of bias in how they present the information. You can look at two different news sources, picking the same topic, providing the same information, but they're going to approach it differently, right? So you have some way of shaping the perception of the audience. And you want to be intentional about your word choices, your organization, and what sort of facts you bring up around that topic, because you're going to help shape the audience's perception of it. You're also going to want to, talks about helping helping your audience understand the different alternatives involved. So again, the difference between a persuasive speech and informative speech. In a persuasive speech, you're going to inform the audience too, right? You're going to share information about the topic, but we have an end goal of trying to get them to act in a certain way or change their mind on something. With an informative speech, you may be informing them of different options. So you can articulate alternatives saying, hey, these are the different options that are available on this topic. These are different paths, but you're not going to pick one over the other. Again, you're going to shape the audience's perception. So you may be shaping their perception in a way, either consciously or unconsciously. You may be shaping the audience's perception to be biased towards one of the options, but it's good to be as objective as you can with an informative speech and just saying, hey, here's the 3 different ways we can approach global warming, right? Here's different things that people are currently doing to work on it. So you can say, hey, these are all different solutions that are going on for this problem. And now you know more about what's currently being done in our world about global warming, right? That's just informing the audience. If you're persuading them, you're going to want them to join in on those solutions or act in a certain way. But with the informative speeches, you're just going to, you could share different alternatives. Not all speeches are going to have alternatives. Sometimes these different purposes, again, here, the functions of an informative speech, it can do maybe a couple of them or one or the other. It's not necessarily going to do all of them. So there are a lot of informative speeches that don't have alternatives, right? You're just giving information on a general topic. So finally here, the final purpose that it can have is to enhance our ability to survive and evolve. So this really looks historically at how information has been shared between individuals to get us to, help us keep developing and being able to communicate and share knowledge with one another. Today, that's still true. We continue to evolve and see the world in different ways, and some of that's through how we're being informed. And I think it's important, especially to be informed on topics we may not have heard about before. If you're giving a speech to the classroom, I love when students pick creative topics that I get to learn something new as an instructor, right? Those are my favorite speeches. Sometimes students pick the same topics every semester that all college students know about. They can talk about, um, you know, whatever it is. There's some general generic topics. I'm thinking persuasive speeches. They talk about college athletes should be paid. They talk about legalizing marijuana. I hear those speeches all the time. For informative speeches, I like to keep it interesting so I get to learn something new, and the audience gets to learn something new as well. So again, it's good to be a little bit creative with your topic choices and go for something unusual to engage the audience, especially in a classroom where you're listening to a ton of speeches. Now, if you're giving a public presentation to a different audience, you may not have a lot of creativity with your topic choice. If you're giving a presentation at work in a form of speech, you're probably not going to be too creative with what you're talking about. You're probably going to be talking about things going on in your workplace. But in the classroom, I appreciate, that opportunity for students to be creative. So now we're going down to the role of the speaker. So it's really important to inform other people, but there's also some responsibilities for speakers in terms of preparing and presenting the informative speeches. So first of all, informative speeches are objective. You have a general purpose to a speech. So your general purpose, it can be to inform, to persuade, to entertain. Informative speeches, it's to inform. That's your general purpose. There's again some overlap. You can inform during an entertainment speech or a persuasive speech, but you're really informing in this speech. That's your general purpose. You're going to have a specific purpose as well on what you're informing them. I'm going to inform my audience about, the different practices being done to make our world a more environmentally friendly place, whatever it may be. So again, you can think about that in terms of what your specific purpose are, but your general purpose for an informative speech is to inform. When you're giving your informative speech, you want to build your own credibility, right? Why are you a credible source for this topic? That's your ethos. So the audience's perception that the speaker is well prepared and qualified to speak on the topic. Now, if you're saying, hey, I'm a student, I'm doing this because it's required, I don't know how qualified I am to speak on the topic, well, you're going to build that credibility. So you can establish your expertise by citing reputable sources, showing that you did your research, that you brought in enough information. You're covering your points with enough detail to demonstrate your expertise. You may have some personal expertise on the topic or connection, like why did you pick this topic? If you just picked a random topic out of the hat, it may not be as exciting, right? You may not be able to establish your expertise in that way, but just showing you did some good research can be helpful. You also want to help the audience identify with you. So that's part of the ethos as well, that's someone that you like. We see in presidential elections or even other elections in the United States, sometimes people say they want to vote for the person they feel like they can have a beer with, right? So again, you want to be able to identify, that your audience identify with you, because that boosts your credibility. People trust you more, trust what you have to say. So you may want to think about wearing appropriate and attractive clothing. All right, what's appropriate for that occasion? What looks professional? When I'm teaching, I often wear a collared shirt of some sort in order to teach. Because that's appropriate and for that setting. It helps build my credibility versus going in and just wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt. Now you can do that. Some instructors do. They build their credibility in other ways. But again, it's good. Again, if you only have a few minutes to build your credibility, you're going to want to look decent. You don't have to dress up in a suit and tie. Some people do like doing that. If you look at competitive speeches, people do that. But again, just being somewhat professional in what you wear can be helpful. Talks about being friendly and enthusiastic, relating to the listener's situations, feelings, and motives. So again, building that audience's connection. How does your topic and how do you connect with that audience? Then also show you're telling the truth. That helps boost your credibility. So especially in informative speech, you're not trying to persuade the audience. So sharing different sides of an issue can be helpful, saying, hey, I did research on both sides. Here's what each of the sides says, right? That's an informative speech. Here's the two sides of this debate. Here's the two sides of the debate about legalizing marijuana. That can be an informative speech that shows you're credible, right? If you give fair time to each of those sides and give a good overview of them. You also want to approach your speech with ethics and positive intentions for your audience. So another thing to just consider is, am I being ethical in how I'm approaching the speech? Am I, not plagiarizing? Am I doing my own work? Those are things that can come across when you're giving the speech as well. And just making sure you're prepared. If you practice the speech, you're going to seem more credible because the speech will flow better and you know what you're going to say. Informative speakers are knowledgeable, right? You're knowledgeable on the topic. You want to be knowledgeable. Do your research on the topic, right? Make sure you're doing enough research so you can talk about it for a few minutes. So it says to avoid weak or questionable sources. So often Wikipedia, Britannica.com, Ask.com, those things don't sound as credible. Encyclopedias have a lot of great knowledge, but they give a very broad overview of information. And you want specific information to show you look deeply on your topic. If you just said, hey, I just did looked up a Wikipedia page, you didn't do a ton of research on the topic. That's usually one of the first things that might pop up if you do a Google search. So delving a little deeper into the research, having more credible sources can be helpful. You may want to think about, your library, right? Your school library is going to have a lot of great resources that are probably more credible that you're able to use. Again, you're going to want to make sure they're credible sources and use some media literacy to make sure they're good. But even if you're going through Google and finding some information, Google Scholar can be a little more helpful. But even just general Google, like you can figure out, okay, which sources are going to be credible for my audience, or how am I going to make this credible? Sometimes you can find a really good source that's like a blog, and you're like, okay, is this blog credible? Is this just a random person typing online, or is this an expert on the topic? So you may want to boost the source's expertise when you're citing it and when you're doing a verbal citation in your speech. You want to make sure you're verbally citing all your sources. That's part of building your credibility. But especially if you have a source which may be borderline, you can use that opportunity to build the speaker's credibility, saying, "Hey, this person has been, raising bees for 20 years." Yeah, if we never heard of the person, right, we don't know why they're an expert on bee raising, but you can say they've raised bees for 20 years. So build their expertise of the person. So you're going to do that formal citation, the verbal citation in your speech, and then you can also boost the credibility of the source along with that citation. You want to think about making the topic relevant for the audience. Again, you're designing the speech with the audience in mind. So it talks about what's in it for me. That's a lot of times the audience, especially if they're listening to a ton of speeches, like, okay, what am I supposed to do with this information? I'll clap nicely, you have a captive audience if you're giving it in a classroom, but what's in it for me? You can make it relevant to the audience. You can make it valuable to them. If you're giving a speech in the community, you're going to think about, okay, who would come to this sort of presentation, and what do they want to know based off of it? If you're giving a presentation at work, right? Is this just another boring meeting that we're forced to go to? Or what's in it for the audience? How's this going to help them do their job better? Really think about the audience's perspective when making the topic relevant to them. So those are all some tips to boost your credibility when giving a speech. Next, we're going to look at different types of informative speeches. So this first one's a definitional speech, a kind of descriptive speech, where you're going to go, describe a topic. You're going to, it says definitional speech attempts to set forth the meaning of concepts, theories, philosophies, or issues that may be unfamiliar to an audience. So when we're looking at these definitional speeches, we want to really think about how are we giving information to the audience and how we're describing the topic, again, being ethical, being thoughtful, and how we're approaching it. So your purpose then is to really provide a detailed description of the situation of whatever your topic is. So this example here talks about the religious beliefs of Buddhist philosophy. Certainly you could talk about that. That could be an informative speech where you're giving information. This one talks about describing the Taj Mahal in detail. So again, you're going to want to think about how are you going to approach a topic. You can think about these things and what sort of details are you going to provide. At the beginning of this lesson, I talked about you looking into these outlines. They give some great examples of how to break up a speech. So it gives a title, a specific purpose, gives kind of a thesis or a central idea, and then it gives the main points here that you'll be covering. You can see that this is a keyword outline for the body of it, and the introduction gives a little bit more detail too. So these all can be very helpful in what sort of information you're going to provide and how you're going to go through the speech, what sort of flow you're going to have. Another type of speech besides the descriptive speech is the explanatory speech. So it talks about here about some of the differences between a descriptive speech and an explanatory speech. So a descriptive speech attempts to paint a picture with words so the audience can experience it, can experience the idea, the concept, whatever you're describing. Whereas explanatory speech focuses on the how or why of the topic. So this is really thinking about how or why. So the example that they're giving here is a descriptive speech can be on the daily life of Marie Antoinette, so just describing what happens, whereas explanatory speech could talk about how she came to her death, really about the how or the why that brought about her death. So you're going to want to think about that. Again, are you describing something or are you explaining something? So those are some of the differences. So this is another example, this one for an explanatory speech outline of the different aspects regarding the tsunami here, how or why it happened. A demonstration speech is also maybe a little more active. That's how I've seen these a little more interactive, where you're demonstrating how something is done, or demonstrating how the audience can do something if they come across a situation. So I'm going to teach you how to cook, right? I'm going to teach you how to cook this specific dish. Certainly you can do that. That's a demonstration speech. Talks about the example here demonstrating how you survive if you get stranded in the wild. You can go through that and describe that to the audience so they can have that information if they ever need it in the future. So that's another type of informative speech. You have the descriptive, you have the explanatory, and you have the demonstration speeches. It's three of the main types of informative speeches. So when you're developing informative speeches, you're going to want to think about some different aspects of the speech. First of all, you're going to want to generate and maintain interest. I've talked about this a little before. At first, you're going to use an attention getter right away in the speech before you say anything else. Before you even say, hi, my name is Bradley, and I'm going to give a speech about, little pets. I'm going to give a speech about pets, right? I have a few pets. Before you do that, you want the attention getter, right? Before you say your name, before you say your topic, before you do anything else, give your attention getter to gain the audience's attention at the topic. It can be a startling statistic, it can be a fact, a quote, other information, but you're going to want the attention getter. Then you can introduce yourself and introduce your topic after you do your attention getter. But you're going to want to generate interest right away and then maintain it throughout the speech. So even in the introduction, when you're introducing yourself, you may gain the audience's attention more by sharing some of your expertise. You build your credibility and you say, hey, this is why I'm a great person to listen to on this topic, and this is why I think you'll be interested in it. So those attention getters can be very helpful. So it talks about different ways to draw in the audience's interest. So first of all, intensity, so talking about something that has a high or extreme degree of emotion, color, volume, strength, or other defining characteristic. Sometimes visual aids can help with this. If you have some cool visual aids to really put the topic in perspective, even if it's statistics, if you can put statistics into a visual aid to put it in perspective for the audience, that'd be really cool. Or just having a photo of a shark if you're talking about sharks. These photos can help it as well. Novelty. So again, pick something, don't pick the same thing as everybody else if you're giving a speech, right? Find something new or unusual to really engage the audience, something they may not have heard about. If you know this interesting fact or interesting thing that you want to give your speech about, maybe pick that, something novel, something different to make it stand out from the rest, especially in the classroom. But even if you, have giving a speech at work, or in a different environment, you can find an angle to make it a little bit new or unusual. Like, how are we going to do things differently? Why should you listen to me this time? If it's the same report that I'm giving out every month at my workplace, that's the same informative speech I'm getting, how can I make it a little bit different? What new can I add there? It's like, hey, I'm doing something new this month. So you might want to actually listen to me this time, right? So you might want to think about what other angles can you take, even if it's the same information. Contrast is another way. So contrasting two different things. Something that's different or opposite to put it in perspective. So that can be, helpful for the audience as well. Talks about some movement or activity that can be, again, what are you going to do to sometimes professional speakers on a speaking circuit competitions, they'll have 3 different spots they'll stand on stage and move themselves around. So you'll show some movement. You can get the audience to move a little bit too. I know one of the great ways to gain their attention in the introduction is have them raise their hand. Like, how many of you have been to the ocean before? If you're talking about shark attacks, you can get students to raise their hand, or the audience in general to raise their hand, and that can be helpful to engage them, get a little movement, get them waking up, making sure they're paying attention to the speech. That can be great as well. So it can be your own movement, or it can be with the movement of the audience. Also talks about using humor, and you're going to want to be careful. If you're using humor, make sure it's relevant, make sure it's in good taste. So you'll maybe be able to share something funny. So again, it depends on how it's approached. I like a little bit of humor. It kind of breaks up a presentation and makes it a little more interesting. So certainly you can do that. And here it talks about telling stories. So telling a story from your own life, telling a story that you found online, that can engage the audience as well. So it can be a funny story. You can use the humor there, or just a story in general that's related to your topic to engage the audience. If it's the attention getter, it can be a short story just to quickly gain their attention. But if it's a longer story, you may want to put it in the body of your essay, body of your speech, to be able to have more time to get into the details. Or you may give a snippet of the story in the introduction and give more details in the body as well. So a few different ways to put a story in there and include that in a speech. And then just in general, be creative. Speakers who are different are memorable. So be creative in a good way. Make sure your speech has some impact, use some imagination, do something a little bit different. I'm not a super creative person. I'm always, envious of people who are creative and have those creative creative genes. I like to think of it just, or have natural creative ability. But you don't have to be super creative to be creative with a speech. You can be, that'd be great, right? I love when people do that. But again, you're just doing something a little bit differently. Again, how can I change this or make it unique? How can I make it my own? And use some creativity to create some connections there. So give some examples here, which certainly you can read through about how to be creative and tips for jumpstarting your creativity if you want more information on that. You can also stimulate the audience's intellect. Uh, you know, again, most people have a genuine desire to learn things about the world. If it's in a classroom, people are in a classroom to learn, right? Not some people will feel like they have to be there, right? They're just obligated and going, trying to jump through the hoops to get a degree so they can get a better job. But a lot of people actually like learning, and especially if you give them something interesting to learn about, something that can engage their interest. It talks about that there's a lot of TV shows just dedicated to teaching about history, about science, about whatever else. And people do enjoy learning about things, but you have to engage them in a certain way, in a specific way, to get them interested. So again, how are you going to stimulate the audience? Who is your audience, and how are they going to connect to your topic? I always tell my students, pick a topic that interests you. Don't pick a topic that you think is going to interest your audience. Pick a topic that interests you. And if it interests you, you can share why you're interested in the topic, why you're passionate about it, why you're engaged with this topic. And that can help the audience connect to it as well. If you're not passionate about the audience, if you're picking something just generic enough that you think your audience will like enough, you're not going to have as much excitement about it. Again, we want to make something novel, exciting, new, and you can be more passionate. That's one of the things I've been told about giving speeches, that people like my passion. That I'm very passionate and engaged when I give speeches, because I pick things that interest me, and that gets the audience excited as well. So think about your own connection to the topic and why it's interesting to you, and then build those connections to the audience. Then creating coherence, so organizing the speech logically. There's another chapter on organizing a speech. This chapter does include a lot of great examples. I do recommend going back and looking through those examples on how to organize a speech. But you're going to want to make sure, again, that builds your credibility. The audience is going to follow along. If people get lost or don't know what you're talking about, that makes it more difficult for them to enjoy your speech and appreciate it. So again, thinking about, how am I going to help the flow of the presentation? I also think about signposts as well. So having signposts to say, okay, now that we've talked about topic one, we're going to move into topic two. We're going to move into the second body paragraph. Again, you're going to want to use your specific details, but again, having those signposts, internal summary, you're going to summarize what you just talked about and say where you're going next. So give the audience the information they need to follow along with the speech. Sometimes if you don't have signposts, sometimes you're just like jumping from one to the next, and then the speech is over, and it was hard to follow along. You don't even know what's going to end. But if you have appropriate signposts throughout, it's going to help the flow of the speech, so audience know, hey, okay, we're starting, we're now moving along, and now we're wrapping up the speech. So it helps with the flow. And also, the textbook recommends using simple language. What language is your audience going to understand? If you're using a lot of jargon or technical terms, that's going to be difficult. You're going to need to define those in your speech. And if you use too many of them, even if you're defining all of them, it's going to get a little difficult to follow along with. So you're going to want to. It talks about the Gettysburg Address contains only 271 words, and 251 of the words only have 1 or 2 syllables. It's a short speech. It's simple language, and it's very easy to connect to. So you're going to want to think about how to simplify it. Sometimes people use big words to make them sound smart, but again, the audience is going to see your intelligence and expertise on the topic through the details you provide. You don't need to use big words to sound smart if the information you're providing is smart, right? You can talk simply and make it easy for everyone to understand. And that also helps connect to the audience if they're not experts on the topic. Using simple language makes it easy to follow along with. You also want to avoid information overload. Sometimes people just try and throw everything at the audience and cover everything on this topic. I'm going to tell you everything about China, right? I'm going to inform you on China. Well, you can't inform me on China in a 4 to 6 minute speech. Right? What are you going to inform me? Pick something very specific that you can do in that amount of time. Don't try and cram too much into one speech, right? Pick specific things, maybe even one specific thing that you can go into detail on for the amount of time that you have. If you're giving a longer speech, you may be able to go through a variety of different topics. So again, I'm teaching an entire semester on public speaking. So I can go through a lot of different topics in enough depth. But if I'm just having given 4 to 6 minutes on how to give a speech, I'm going to have to be very specific and pick, maybe 3 key main points that I want to cover, that I want the audience to take away. So I'm not going to cover everything on how to give a speech. I'm going to say, I'm going to give you 3 key main points, inform you about 3 key things on how to give a good speech. That doesn't mean I'm covering everything, but I'm just covering what I can in the amount of time I'm having. You can also tell the audience, say, hey, here's some of my sources. When you're verbally citing them, these are great places to go if you want to learn more. That can be a call to action in the end. Hey, I'm informing you about this. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you want to learn more, here's where you can go to get more information. So you don't have to include everything in your speech. Just give them enough to get it started. You can also give a resource sheet. So I know sometimes I've been to presentations that are even an hour long and saying, hey, I can cover everything. Here's more information. Here's a sheet of resources that you can bring, that you can find. Here's websites, here's books, here's other places with information that you can find resources on this topic. Then it says about making the speech memorable. So first, build in some repetition. Martin Luther King's "I have a dream" speech. I have a dream. I have a dream. Right, there's that repetition. So being able to find some repetition is helpful. This also gives an example of the Sojourner Truth's speech at the Women's Rights Convention about "Ain't I a woman?" "Ain't I a woman? Ain't I a woman? Ain't I a woman?" That's again that repetition keeps it into the mind of the audience, and makes it for a very strong speech. You can appeal to different ways of learning. So again, that's why it can be helpful to have visual aids. Some people are visual learners. Some people just like listening to the lectures, to the idea that you're sharing. Some people like reading and writing. So being able to have a handout or information or even text on the screen along with it. You don't want to read off a screen. You don't want too much text, but just some information, especially if you have statistics or facts that you want to share. It helps people absorb it if they can absorb it through multiple ways. Some people like hands-on activities as well. So again, getting them to raise their hand, a simple way to engage that type of learner, but finding ways to, get work together, with your hands moving around, doing something. So sometimes you can have hands-on activities as part of a speech or presentation if you have enough time. Again, you can read through these some more if you want to look for other ways to engage a variety of learning styles. But again, speeches, you're probably giving a speech. That's probably your main way of delivering information. But what other ways can you include? What else? Again, types of visuals, types of handouts, types of hands-on activities. How can you engage those other types of learning even when you're giving a speech? So it talks here about using visuals, visual aids. It can be a prop, it can be a PowerPoint, it can be a Prezi, it can be a handout. There are a variety of ways to use visual aids. So people are often like the visual aids. We have talks about an immediate culture. People are usually visually oriented. People are on their phones and computers all the times, looking at stuff, and the ones that get most clicks or engagement on social media are images or short videos. TikTok now is very popular, and I think Facebook has Reels, Instagram has something like that too, where they have short video clips, and those video clips, those short video clips, or the images are the ones that get the most engagement, on social media. So, people like visual aids. So if you can include a visual aid in your presentation, make sure to do it, but don't make sure it doesn't distract from your speech either. Again, you want visual aids that are going to enhance your speech. So sometimes if people have a PowerPoint, they may have blank slides in their PowerPoint just to take the visual aids off the screen for a moment while they're sharing some other information. So that can help with the flow of the presentation. So there's not a visual distracting when you're giving all the information. But you can give visual aids throughout, multiple visual aids. You can do one. You can do, again, a prop, even the clothes you're wearing. If you're giving a speech on duck hunting, you could go and wear some waders and full duck hunting gear. You certainly can do that to gain the audience's attention. Maybe a little duck whistle at the beginning for the attention getter. So again, different ways to engage people, their different senses. So that's a little bit about informative speaking. There's a variety of different subtypes of informative speeches, but your main goal is to inform. So it talks about the 4 main types of informative speeches: definitional, descriptive, explanatory, or demonstration speeches. And there are a variety of different techniques you can use to engage the audience. So again, first and foremost, pick a topic that excites you and then figure out how to connect it to the audience. You'll be informing them about something. You can give them a variety of information, show that you're credible throughout the speech. Even sharing why you picked the topic can be helpful. I like this quote here at the end: "If you have knowledge, let others light their candles at it." by Margaret Fuller. So again, sharing your knowledge with other people, sharing your expertise, especially if it's something innovative, if it's new, if you're taking a different take on it, it can really engage an audience and have a lot of value. So I hope you take some time to look back through this chapter, look at some of those outline examples. They have some other resources here at the end, some questions, some glossaries of key terms, potential topics. So if you're like, oh, I don't know what to give a speech about, again, here are some topics here. But again, take some time to read through the chapter on your own, but hopefully you enjoyed this video lecture to give you an overview of informative speaking. Thanks for listening.